Do chimpanzees exhibit moral behaviour? Human beings are always trying to find ways to differentiate themselves from other animal species, to find ways in which they're special, even superior. That's not surprising. We even try to find such differences within our species in order to assert our superiority. Of course, I wouldn't deny that there are differences between the human species and other species. This is, after all, what enables us to talk about a species at all. I would suggest, though, that this lies in a suite of behaviours and characteristics rather than some single standout feature. For instance, we might want to point to our intelligence, somewhat overrated I would suggest, as the feature that distinguishes us from other animals. But other species also exhibit intelligence to varying degrees and of various types, suggesting that this is on a scale rather than representing some kind of absolute distinction. After all, we're willing to acknowledge that intelligence is on a scale within the human species, so why not between species? The same is true of other things, such as emotions, and I would suggest morality. Consider emotions. We have this rather odd habit of seeing states in animals that, when seen in humans, we would identify as emotional states, yet we tend to dismiss them in animals, or at least the scientific community does. The lay population is more likely to attribute emotions within the natural world where there clearly are none. But when we watch a dog or a chimpanzee, we clearly witness what in a human being would be unambiguously defined as an emotional state. But one of the last bastions of supposedly uniquely human behaviour is the question of morality. The American theologian and ethicist Reinhold Niebuhr, in his 1932 book Moral Man and Immoral Society, argued that in the animal the instincts of self-preservation do not extend beyond the necessities provided by nature. However, most theologians and philosophers don't really address the question of the origin of morality in evolutionary or naturalistic terms. They tend to regard morality as based in high-level reasoning that's only within the grasp of human beings. I would argue, though, that this high level of ethical reasoning, as well as religious arguments concerning morality, are post hoc rationalizations of ethics, which actually emerges, I would suggest, for somewhat less highfalutin reasons. As individuals, most of us learn our moral behaviour the hard way, so to speak. To put it more kindly, moral behaviour is socially transmitted and reinforced by a system of reward and punishment. Many, if not most of us, don't reason too hard about morality. I've argued before, and will again here, that morality arises out of the need to cooperate within a group in order to reap the benefits of such behaviour. When group living evolves, it becomes necessary to formulate rules of behaviour. When I say formulate, I don't mean to suggest that committees of philosophers, ethicists and theologians sit around and hammer out a system of rules for the group. These norms arise organically within the group. Those that promote the survival of the group or improve the welfare of the group naturally gain traction. The systematization of these norms into some kind of societal code only comes later, much later in fact, and sometimes gets out of control. And it can sometimes be hijacked by particular subgroups within the society. Philosophical reflection about the origin and nature of this code and the norms and principles underlying it come along even later. People behave in moral ways, or what we call moral ways, before they even realise they are, and certainly before they start writing books about it. Most morality, I would suggest, is unreflective, even now, even in you and me. Within any social group, where existing and working together as a group clearly has evolutionary benefits, rules will emerge. Even apparently altruistic behaviour will emerge. Ants and bees will die to protect their colony. The need to protect the colony overrides any instinct to protect the self. I don't mean to suggest that this is any more than instinctive behaviour, but it shows how behaviour that, when observed in humans, would be interpreted as altruistic or even heroic, can clearly emerge without the need for vast systems of morality or religion to explain or enforce it. Kevin Langergraber and his colleagues carried out a 20-year study of the patrolling behaviour of chimpanzees. I'll put a link to their article below in the description. This is risky behaviour that serves to protect the group from external threats, particularly the threats of other groups. So why do individual chimps undertake this task? Of course, they may look to gain more individually. They may have a large number of relatives to protect. But the authors of this study noted that, quote, males frequently patrolled even when they had no close maternal relatives or offspring in the community to protect. Perhaps this represents an investment in future opportunities for mating. We might then argue that this is not a purely altruistic act, this patrolling, but that doesn't mean it isn't a moral act. I suggest that very few, if any, decisions or acts carried out by humans would pass the pure altruism test. But I would argue that this isn't what morality is anyway. Morality is about protecting the group and retaining the benefits that accrue from this, for ourselves as well as others. There appear to be clear benefits to all chimps when they're part of a larger group, including increased reproductive success for all members of the group and not just the dominants. Again, the authors of this paper write, as in other primate species living in multi-male, multi-female groups, the strength of the relationship between male dominance rank and reproductive success decreases with group size in chimpanzees. This levelling of reproductive success should provide an incentive for all males to work hard to increase group size so as to maximise their reproductive opportunities. The fact that a particular individual may be hoping to gain more by high-risk behaviour than other members of the group doesn't negate the social value or indeed the moral value of the action. In fact, I would argue that the fact that the individual potentially gains or risks losing more reinforces this behaviour that aids the group. Because the hero chimp may gain more, we tend to regard this behaviour as somehow less moral than similar behaviour in humans. They stand to gain personally. I would argue, though, that exactly the same is true in human society. It's not that chimp behaviour is less ethically pure than our own. Our own behaviour is less ethically pure than we like to think it is. Even war heroes who perform seemingly altruistic acts may gain social status and more mating opportunities in this way. Or they may have some kind of eternal benefit in mind. Or they may be protecting their offspring and broader family group, thus perpetuating their particular gene group within society. It's always possible to postulate non-altruistic motives for seemingly altruistic acts. And this may also sometimes make us angry because it seems to reduce the value of such an act. But then, that supports the idea that performing an altruistic act can result in increased status within the group. In 1996, in an Illinois zoo, a female gorilla called Binti Jua rescued a 3-year-old boy after he fell into her enclosure. She carefully carried him to a door where rescuers could collect him. We can't, of course, claim to know her motivation for this act. Was she just hoping for a reward? Were her maternal instincts particularly active at the time? She was carrying her own 17-month child on her back at the time. Maybe, and maybe. But note that we wouldn't even ask this question of a human actor in such a situation. We would just think they wanted to help. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. There are all kinds of reasons for doing the right thing, none of which, I would argue, are along the following lines. I consulted several ethical treatises to determine what was the right action to take in this situation. 99.999% of our apparently moral decisions and actions are not based on such considerations. Yet they're not less moral for that. Because you see, I don't believe that what we call ethical behaviour in human beings is a result of deep reasoning or of divine revelation. These things come later to attempt to explain or reinforce our behaviour. What we call morality has evolved alongside the development of social behaviour. It's necessary for the survival of the group, from which all members of the group benefit, at least potentially. Of course, sometimes this breaks down, particularly when we seek to justify purely selfish behaviour on moral grounds, or when we try to enforce the values of particular subgroups within the larger group. And of course, history tells us that it fails us catastrophically in the context of intergroup conflict. We then try to define a larger group, e.g., the human race as a whole. But so far, the success of that endeavour has been minimal. Once again, it's obvious that we need that external threat to humanity from alien invaders to unite us as a group.